All right, you think you're done with me, but you're not done with me. One of our scheduled readers tonight, Lania Knight, had some last-minute travel problems getting back to Chicago, so I'm filling in for her. This is the part where you would groan if you were a normal Tuesday Funk crowd. All right. So instead... Thank you. Now I feel like it's Tuesday Funk. Thank you. So instead of her, you get to hear me read a chapter from the young adult science fiction novel that I just finished, and which theoretically is making its way to a dozen or so editors this week. We'll see. If my agent is watching this video, it better be in front of those editors. So this thing's had a lot of titles during its long life, but the one that finally stuck is Root, and this is going to be the second chapter of the book. So Root is the story of Hasta Viramachaneni, a 15-year-old sophomore at Amundsen High School over there at Foster and Damon. Hasta, her parents are Hindu. She has a brand new maybe boyfriend named Juan. Well, at least he kissed her the day before. And a best friend named Ivan, who's pretty sure there's something weird about their school. And there is, because every teacher at this Amundsen High School has a different weird rule in their classroom that must be obeyed. The rule in Ms. Deckard's computer science class is learn first, ask questions later. But Hasta can't help asking questions, so she's been assigned after-school detention, along with her former friend Jillian Smart, who tried to get her to shut up. Now, Jillian's part of a little clique that Hasta calls the Drowned Girls, because for some reason, they all use makeup to make their faces look blue. So that's chapter 1. This is chapter 2. Detention was in Mr. Clement's history classroom. His stupid rule was that you could only do your homework using reference books from his room or the school library. No other resources allowed, online or off. And the freaky thing was, he always seemed to know when you cheated. But thankfully, he wasn't there yet. Hasta took a seat in the corner of the chilly classroom farthest from the door. She pulled her Einstein sweatshirt out of her backpack and slipped it on over her head. She had the classroom to herself until Jillian slunk in and plopped down in the first desk she came to. The girl glared at Hasta from that ugly blue face. "Thanks a lot, Scud," she said. "Screw you," Hasta said, turning back to the window. "You didn't have to chime in." It was hard to believe they'd ever been friends. Hasta tried to let the scene outside calm her down. Huge elm trees towered over the school's grassy front lawn and fading flower beds. The patterns of sunlight and shadow that ruffled their green and orange canopies reminded her of the shifting patterns of the game of life. The way each individual leaf flipped from light to dark and back seemed random, yet she could almost glimpse a system at work behind the overall pattern. A spray of leaves shuddered loose from one bough and drifted up, straight up. Hasta blinked. That's weird, she thought. But when she looked again, the leaves were halfway to the ground and still fluttering downward, her eyes and mind playing tricks on her again. Heels clicked loudly on tile. "Let me not waste your time, ladies," Principal Armistead said, striding through the door and pulling it shut behind her. Jillian barely glanced up from the yellow legal pad she was writing on, but Hasta sat up straight. What was this? She thought Mr. Clement was supposed to be running detention. The principal stopped in front of a map of the Asian war zones. "Miss Smart, please pay attention," she said, snapping her fingers. Jillian sullenly looked up. "Your detention assignment is to write me a paper at least 500 words in length. Choose an ancient culture and describe how they believed the world would end." Jillian groaned and put her head down on the desk. Hasta swallowed her annoyance and nodded intently. She'd gotten herself into this mess. Getting through it was all she needed to think about. She could do this. Principal Armistead swept her arm in a broad arc that took in Mr. Clement's many creaky bookshelves filled with moldy old tomes. Her burgundy polyester pantsuit shimmered in the slanting afternoon sunlight. "You may consult any volume in the room, of course. And since this is my assignment, you may feel free to do your research electronically. But I don't want you emailing or texting. Oh, and one more thing. Her violet eyes narrowed at each girl in turn. Her gaze made Hosta feel like a frog on the dissection table. I don't have to tell you how rare disciplinary problems are here at Amundsen High. One student in detention is remarkable enough, but since I have 2 today, I'd like to try something a little different. I want to see you collaborate. I want your joint paper at the end of the hour. What? Hosta protested. She felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She pointed at Jillian, who was snickering ruefully and shaking her head. You can't really expect us to work together. Principal Armistead had turned to leave. One hand rested on the doorknob. I can expect it, and I do, she said, looking back. You disrupted poor Miss Deckard's class together this afternoon, so I find it only fair that you make up for it together here now. Do well on this assignment, and I can consider writing off your detention, which would mean it stays out of your permanent record. The principal gave Hosta another sharp look before exiting. I want your joint paper at the end of the hour, Jillian said in a mocking voice. She rolled up a narrow strip ripped from the top of her legal pad and held it to her lips. I get your joint paper right here. Hosta sighed. It was going to be a long hour. I can't believe she's leaving us in here together without supervision. Oh, you think she's not watching? Jillian said. Set one foot out the hatch. See how fast she treks. Treks? Jillian rolled her eyes. Shows up out of nowhere? Oh, how does she know? What do I look like, Einstein? Jillian said, pointing at Hosta's sweatshirt. She just knows. She went back to writing on her pad. Her black backpack sat open on the floor beside her. Hosta looked around the classroom but couldn't spot any hidden cameras. She ended up staring longingly out the window at the cloudless sky. The daytime weather index for Chicago was a perfect 67 degrees, but that would only hold until 5 o'clock. She hated wasting any of this beautiful October weather. She wanted to be outside, not stuck here doing make work with a certified juvenile delinquent. But she had no choice in the matter. Gritting her teeth, she gathered up her backpack and moved to the desk next to Jillian's on the opposite side of the room. She would have preferred to stay by the open windows, but someone was going to have to take the lead here. Jillian hunkered protectively over her legal pad. Pardon me, she said, glaring at Hosta. You heard Armistead. We have to work together. No way, Jillian said. I'm not writing any dopey paper, not with you. I got my own biz to tend to. Hosta leaned into the aisle, trying to read over Jillian's arm. What is that? Party invitation, Jillian said with a sullen sneer. Her bloodshot eyes drilled Hosta. Don't worry, you're on the roll. The roll? Like invited? That's what I said. Hosta sat back, surprised. Are you serious? As a cardiac arrest. Jillian bent back to her task, pen in hand. A party invitation from Jillian Smart was the last thing Hosta expected, and probably not something she wanted to accept. No doubt they were way into drift. That's a drug that's going around the school. Well, cool, I guess, Hosta said, but we still need to get this done. I don't know about you, but I can't afford another black mark. Jillian snorted a laugh. Blood heated Hosta's cheeks. Was that funny? Putting down her pen, Jillian turned a cold smile on Hosta. What cracks me up is you think it matters. It totally matters. Hosta bounced in her seat, trying to keep a rein on her temper. You may not care about getting into college, but I do. Jillian smirked. Oh, right, because I forgot that rules don't apply to you. Of course the rules apply to me, Hosta said, though it felt a little like a lie. Not as much as the need for attention. Hosta's anger flared. I need attention. I'm not the one walking around with my face painted blue. What's that about? Jillian's lips compressed. Just trying to blend in with the enemy, she muttered. Hosta put her palms flat on her desk and took a deep breath. Look, she said, eyes on her hands. All we have to do is write one stupid little paper and we're out of here. I'll do the work. I've already got an ancient civilization in mind. All you need to do is a little Googling to make it look good in case they're watching our net usage. What do you say? Jillian sniffled, picked up her pen again, and bent deliberately over her legal pad. She didn't look at Hosta. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, she said quietly. What do you mean? I'm trying to make it easier. Jillian heaved a weary sigh. Screw this, she said. Listen, Scud, do me a favor. Just leave me alone. And whatever goes down next, stay chill. Don't freak out on me. With her right forefinger, Jillian traced a clockwise circle on the back of her left wrist. Then she slumped a little and didn't move. Startled, Hosta reached out and shook her shoulder. Jillian! Jillian slid farther down in her seat, and her head tipped sideways toward her shoulder. Her eyes and mouth hung open. That plus the blue makeup made her look more like a corpse than ever. Jillian! Hosta only realized she'd stood up and backed away when she bumped with a clatter into another desk. She felt strangely queasy. What was happening? A seizure? An overdose? Was it a practical joke? If you're just kidding around, Jillian, you better tell me now, Hosta said. I'm serious. Saliva leaked out the corner of Jillian's mouth. She still didn't move, although she did appear to be breathing. Heart pounding, Hosta ran to the classroom door and out into the long hall. From what Jillian had said, she expected to find Principal Armistead lurking right there, but there was no one in sight. Hey, anybody! She shouted. No answer. Hosta peeked back into the classroom. Jillian sat sprawled at her desk as inertly as ever. Hosta could go hunting for Principal Armistead or for one of the teachers, but she wasn't sure it was a good idea to leave Jillian alone. Time to call 911. As she pulled her cell phone out and dialed with shaking fingers, she thought she sensed someone smoking nearby. She didn't smell anything, but couldn't shake the impression of burning cigarettes. She put the phone to her ear. Emergency dispatch, said a woman's voice. What is the nature of your emergency? Hey, what are you doing? Jillian demanded, sitting up straight in her chair and blinking. Startled and relieved, Hosta turned her back on Jillian. Sorry, I think I butt dialed, she said, with one hand curled around her mouth. She broke the connection. Jillian wiped the spit from her mouth. What, were you calling an ambulance or something? I thought you were dying, Hosta said, all her anger churning up as she rounded on the girl. Jillian rolled her head around as if she were working a kink out of her neck. Freak, she said. Didn't I say stay chill? Hosta turned her phone off, worried 911 might call her back. You didn't say you were about to go into a coma. A little heads up would have been nice. Whatever, said Jillian. She glanced at the clock on the wall. She looked miserable. Tend your own biz, okay? She traced another little circle on her wrist. What is that, some kind of self-hypnosis trick? Hosta asked. But Jillian had already slumped over again. Hosta made a frustrated sound. The queasy feeling was back. She clomped over to the desk next to Jillian's, making as much noise as she could to retrieve her backpack. Jillian didn't so much as stir. Sitting again in the farthest corner, Hosta pulled out her netbook and tried to concentrate on the assignment. It was hard because, weirded out, she kept looking at Jillian's insensate form. Screw her. Given her family's faith, Hosta figured it would be easiest to write about the ancient Hindus. She wasn't a believer herself, but she'd been exposed to the philosophies and the myths her whole life. The Hindu Holy Trinity comprised Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer, though each had endless other functions and attributes that overlapped in confusing ways. According to some traditions, the world ended every time Brahma went to sleep and was reborn each time he woke up. According to others, the world was instead a dream of Vishnu's that would end when he awoke. Hosta typed up a page of notes, checking Wikipedia 2 or 3 times, in an attempt just to untangle all the variant stories. I should have picked Ragnarok instead, Hosta said to herself after 20 minutes of trying to put together a clear line of explanation. The end of the world in Norse mythology, as she'd learned from Thor comics, was a simple, clear-cut battle between good and evil. She decided to focus on the different ways of looking at the cycle of destruction and rebirth in Hindu myth. She typed furiously, interrupted every few minutes by Jillian waking up and putting herself back to sleep. Hosta wondered if whole worlds arose and passed away in Jillian's head each time this happened. About 40 minutes in, a big orange cat leapt up onto the windowsill and rubbed its fur against the glass. Hosta shivered watching it. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen a cat. When it jumped down again, she went to the window but couldn't spot it outside. A couple of minutes before the end of the hour, Jillian woke up and stayed up. "How's our paper coming?" she asked, yawning and stretching. "Shut up," Hosta said. "I'm almost done." "Testy little scud," said Jillian. Hosta tuned her out. "In the end," she typed, chewing her lower lip, "the only thing Hindu mythology promises us with any certainty is that our imperfect world will be given chance after chance to redeem itself, to get right the things that went wrong the last time around. With a message like that, no wonder it's still around 5,000 years later." She had just hit save when Principal Armistead walked back into the room. "It's time to turn in your work, ladies," the principal said, holding the door open. She looked back and forth between the two distant desks. "You did work together, am I correct?" Jillian was stuffing her legal pad into her black shoulder bag. "No doubt," she said. Principal Armistead frowned. "Email me your paper and you're both free to go." As Hosta sent the document, Jillian bolted for the door. She ducked under the principal's arms and made her getaway. "Slow down, Miss Smart," Principal Armistead called over her shoulder. "Remember our talk about patience." Hosta stuffed her netbook into her backpack. She lowered her head and tried to slip past Principal Armistead the way Jillian had, but one polyester-encased arm slid down to block her path. "Not so fast, Miss Viramachaneni." Hosta pointed into the hallway. "Why does she get to leave?" "Because you're still on the cusp, and I still have hope for you." "The cusp of what?" The principal didn't answer that. Her violet eyes drilled through Hosta. "Can you give me your assurance that you and Miss Smart really did work together on that paper?" "Yes," Hosta said, squirming. It was hard not to look away. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she protested, glancing at the empty hallway. "She did the research, I did the writing." Principal Armistead sighed. She laid a cold hand on Hosta's shoulder. Hosta tried not to shy away, but the touch made her uncomfortable. "You're a smart young lady, but you'll make a lot of trouble for yourself in this world until you learn to think before you speak. That goes for asking questions and answering them alike. Now I'm afraid I must fail you on your assignment today." "What?" Hosta demanded. "But the assignment's done." "No, it isn't. I know you didn't work together, and that was the assignment." Hosta shrugged the principal's hand off her shoulder, seething. This was so unfair. There was no way she could have passed, not when Jillian wouldn't cooperate. Her nostrils flared. She may as well not even have tried. Principal Armistead smiled in what was probably meant to be a reassuring way, but it only made her look hungry. "Why the sour expression?" she said, standing back from the door. "So you earned one failing grade in detention. It's hardly the end of the world." Hosta stormed out of the room, eager to get away before she said something that would get her in even more trouble. Her father was going to kill her as it was. The long hallway was empty except for Mr. Costner, the elderly white janitor, who was pushing a squeaky mop bucket her way. He began to raise his hand in greeting, but then the world froze. Between one step and the next, she found she couldn't move. This next little short section, the two characters here speak in sign language. Lamb raised his head. "Did you feel that?" he signed. Kneeling across from him, his partner Cray nodded. "The end. It has begun." "Once again," Lamb sighed, "at last." He and Cray rose to their feet as one. The glass box was barely tall enough to let his partner stand up straight. Cray, like Lamb himself, wore a rumpled dark suit beneath a colorless trench coat and fedora, though in the taller demon's clothes, Lamb would have looked like a child playing dress-up. Indeed, even when kneeling, Cray was taller than Lamb at his full height. Lamb looked down through the thick glass to the street far below, 1,353 feet below, to be precise. He felt nothing but a mild curiosity. The people to his left, those for whom this moment waited frozen, silent and unaware on the 103rd floor observation deck of the Willis Tower, found it thrilling, even exhilarating to stand in this spot. To Lamb, except for the view, it was much like standing anywhere else. Perhaps the thrill required human mortality in order to be experienced properly. The end does render our inquiry here moot, Cray said. His hands sketched the words efficiently, without a wasted motion. Lamb nodded, looking up at his partner. They were investigating a report that this northmost of the 4 glass boxes on the side of the tower was periodically shifting to the 102nd floor. But if the end had finally begun, again, then addressing this particular problem became a low priority indeed. Shall we proceed to the north side? He asked. That would seem prudent, Cray said. Any impediments to a clean end will likely be centered in the neighborhoods around Amundsen High School. Again as one, Lamb and Cray turned and stepped from the box back into the building proper. By the time they reached the elevators, the discontinuity had ended and the people around them had resumed milling about and murmuring as if nothing had happened. And for them, nothing had. The elevator doors opened immediately. No one else stepped aboard with Lamb and Cray. On the quick ride down, Lamb contemplated the prospect of the end. It sparked no great excitement in him. The end had come before, how many thousands of times he did not recall, and the end would come again. He expected the process would be orderly, but might there be glitches like the ones Adele McLeod and Brand Banks had presented? He hoped not. At the same time, though, he noted that tracking them down and wiping their brains had been the most interesting thing to happen in this current cycle. The elevator deposited them at ground level. No one paid them any mind as they crossed the lobby, exited into bright autumn sunlight, and walked to their car. The battered brown sedan was parked in front of a fire hydrant, but of course no one had interfered with it. Cray drove them north, with Lamb riding shotgun. To uphold physical law, to preserve and defend the natural order of things, that was their mission. And now, to ensure that the world would end smoothly and without incident. Shiva help whomever stood in their way. Thank you.